Okay, let's get started. I have some weird stuff for you today. It's a bit dark and spooky. Not just a bit though. Very scary. I'll tell you how science can be abused. And we're not here to blame science. This is the story of evil minds that use science to do more harm than help. Let's get straight to the point. Eugenics is the topic I want to talk about. This story has many sides, including evolution theory, social Darwinism, extermination camps, Hitler, and the idea of Aryan race, which was once accepted way too commonly, like it's a very normal thing. Now grab your coffee and sit tight. To put things into perspective, let's start with the definition of eugenics. Eugenics is generally defined as a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population. Let me repeat this part: to improve the genetic quality of a human population. We already see this in action with the animals. Genetic modification is a very common practice with dogs. Today, it's typical to mate selected dogs to produce specific qualities and characteristics. Now, can you imagine the same thing happening to humans? Weak ones being sterilized or worse, killed? This is exactly what eugenics is. You've probably already had a few names in your mind. We'll talk about them. Before we do, let's go all the way back to the ancient times, when everything started. 4th century BC, Plato. He's the one who introduced this idea for the very first time. Though his early version is not identical to what we have today, he basically suggested that government was responsible to increase the number of genetically strong and healthy people. Basing their arguments on Plato's ideas, many political leaders have committed serious crimes throughout the history. Their argument was a little different than Plato's. It was more like, let's get rid of the weak. There were also some civilizations that accepted eugenics as a social ritual without knowing much about what Plato had once said, like Spartans or Romans. You'll get me if you watched 300. Like in the movie, the kids are left in wilderness and the weak ones are automatically ruled out. That's how they created a strong population in their own way. But this has become a part of our recent past in 1900s. It's literally become a scientific theory. And you know who did this? Francis Galton. And you might be asking, who is Francis Galton really? He's the cousin of Charles Darwin. Yep. There's even more weird stuff. This ruling out the weak idea is based on Darwin's evolution theory. Sounds odd, right? I mean, Darwin is kinda guilty for the Jewish massacre, even though he tried to explain something way different. Natural selection is the term that coexists with evolution theory. It refers to the survival of the fittest. In his theory, Darwin talks about adaptation, not just selection. He says that the species that can adapt to their environment can stay alive. He doesn't mention much about the strong. Now, here we have Galton pondering his cousin's theory and drawing conclusions. He says, if natural selection exists, then unnatural selection must also exist. Can't we just accelerate the progress? Let's just sterilize the weak or even kill them and allow only the genetically strong people to reproduce. It might take a few generations anyway. We'll have a super fast natural selection process. This literally pisses off Darwin. He gets mental. He says Galton twists his words and that natural selection must continue in its natural progress. He believes the nature knows best and that no government should have any control over the most fundamental human right, that is the right to live. He defends his position until he died. And that's when Galton went into action. He wrote a book in 1883, a year after the death of Darwin, and came up with the word eugenics. By the way, the word eugenics comes from the Greek word eugenes, meaning well-born. We observed this approach implemented legally and systematically in the first quarter of the 20th century in the United States. Eugenics centers opened with the support of the government. However, we saw the most striking example in Nazi Germany. I'm sure you already know this. The Aryan race Nazi Germany wanted to create was based on eugenics. They wanted to achieve their lifetime dream of becoming a superior race by manipulating natural selection. Before we dig into these details, let's start with the American process. British Francis Galton was given the title of Sir for his works in various fields of science. However, his study on eugenics was the most popular one. He was dreaming of creating a superior race in Britain, but he didn't get much attention in his own country. Yet he was going to ruin millions of people's lives in other countries, like the United States. The movement came into life in Connecticut with the adoption of a eugenics law in 1896. The people who were mentally ill or had epilepsy were forbidden from marrying. In 1903, the American Breeders' Association was created to control reproduction and marriage. In 1911, Race Betterment Foundation was established by John Harvey Kellogg. Does this name ring a bell? Yeah. He's the founder of Kellogg's cereals, as he was also a nutrition expert. The connections. Anyway, this foundation organized national conferences in 1914, 1915, and 1928, and these conferences served as a national eugenics movement. As the concept of eugenics took hold, prominent citizens, scientists, and socialists championed the cause and established the Eugenics Record Office. The office tracked families and their genetic traits, claiming most people considered unfit were immigrants, minorities, or poor. Eugenics in America took a dark turn in the early 20th century, led by California. From 1909 to 1979, around 20,000 sterilizations occurred in California state mental institutions under the guise of protecting society from the offspring of people with mental illness. Many sterilizations were forced and performed on minorities. 33 states would eventually allow involuntary sterilization in whomever lawmakers deemed unworthy to procreate. In 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that forced sterilization of the handicapped does not violate the U.S. Constitution. In the words of Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. In 1942, the ruling was overturned, but not before thousands of people underwent the procedure. Politicians at the time claimed the action was needed to battle rampant poverty and economic strife. However, it may have also been a way to prevent the so-called superior Aryan gene pool from becoming tainted with the weak blood. According to a 1976 Government Accountability Office investigation, between 25 and 50% of Native Americans were sterilized between 1970 and 1976. It's thought that some sterilizations happened without consent during other surgical procedures, such as a appendectomy. In some cases, healthcare for living children was denied, unless their mothers agreed to sterilization. This was the situation in the land of the free, birthplace of the Declaration of the Human Rights. And the movement would also inspire another country, Germany. Not just Germany, other countries such as Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, China, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, France, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland also applied eugenics as a state law at a time in history. But the example in Germany was gonna be one of the most horrific ones. Let's see some really weird connections here. The background of the Holocaust. You know, it all started in the USA and especially in California. In fact, Hitler spoke very highly of these laws in the USA in his book Mein Kampf. We also know his admiration of the Spartans. But the USA was the one who took this movement to Germany itself. The institutions in California started to send all studies and researchers to Germany in the 30s. In 1927, Kaiser Wilhelm Anthropology Institute was established to conduct physical and social anthropology studies along with gene researches. Guess who funded this institute? The Rockefeller Foundation. Come on, what the hell? Yeah, what the hell? But it doesn't end here. Have you heard of Joseph Mengele, the horrible doctor of Auschwitz, who was also called as the Angel of Death? Before he was commissioned in Auschwitz, he was also funded by the Rockefellers to carry out various studies. He gained the required experience in this way before starting his terrifying experiments. Oh, connections. When it comes to Hitler himself, he got to know this eugenics movement when he was in a Landsberg prison. Hitler and his Nazi party attempted a coup in 1923, and Hitler was wounded in this attempt. He was found guilty of treason and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He ended up serving 9 months, but in this time, he understood that it wasn't going to be by force if he wanted to be in power. What he needed was a decent strategy and this was the time he shaped his Nazi propaganda. He also wrote his famous book Mein Kampf during his time and placed eugenics and ethnic cleansing at the center of his campaign. He said the following about Spartans in a second book he wrote that was not published. Sparta must be regarded as the first pure-blood state. The exposure of the sick, weak, deformed children, in short, their destruction was more decent and, in truth, 1,000 times more humane than the wretched insanity of our day, which preserves the most pathological subject, and indeed, at any price, and yet takes the life of 100,000 healthy children in consequence of birth control or through abortions, in order subsequently to breed a race of degenerates burdened with illnesses. Upon being released from the prison, he convinces the German public that they are the superior race, and you know the rest. He wins the election with a landslide. And he wastes no time to commence the eugenics movement. He passes the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring in 1933 to officially start the proceedings. With this law, the doctors were required to report people that were not allowed to reproduce according to a list of genetic diseases prepared by the Genetic Health Court. Doctors who did not obey were punished severely, and around 400,000 people were going to be sterilized with this law. Of course, sterilization was not going to be a fast solution, and institutions such as Harheim Euthanasia Center were opened to speed up the process of ethnic cleansing. The institution has euthanasia in its name, but don't be fooled. These centers were places where people with mental or genetic disorders were killed against their will, and 200,000 people were going to be euthanized in these centers. Right after that, genetically disadvantaged people were put in buses for transportation to some health centers, but the exhaust gas was directed inside the bus, and these people were cleansed according to the law. Then comes the gas chambers, concentration camps, and various tortures, killing, burning, experimenting on millions of people with the eugenics laws. You know how the story goes. And the public was convinced by focusing on one idea. Why do our strong and healthy people carry the burden of the weak and useless, diseased people while they are dying in the war? What's worse, these eugenics movements based on the evolution theory were thought as scientifically correct and rational. Alright, let's get scientific. Is eugenics doable? I mean, can we improve the gene pool with eugenics? Yes, scientifically, it is possible. Besides, science does not tell you what to do. Science is rational. It doesn't have any perspective on the good or the bad. Scientifically speaking, yes, we can improve the human gene pool with this movement. But here comes something that science has nothing to do with: ethics. Even if something can be done, it doesn't mean it must be done. Splitting the atom is the best example here. We've witnessed numerous scientific development with this. But we have also witnessed atomic bombs, the death of thousands of people with nuclear weapons, the destruction of cities. No one can blame science or people who realize these advances. Eugenics is the same. It can be done. But it's totally up to you how you use it. After the Second World War, horrible acts of eugenics were at least mostly ended, but it seems that it's being revived with a completely new face: genetic engineering. Although we're not seeing organized eugenics applications nowadays, the idea is still there, even today. For instance, Richard Harnstein and Charles Murray, professors in Harvard, wrote this in their book, The Bell Curve: Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life. Criminals and unemployed people have a lower average of intelligence compared to the general average. People with low intelligence have a higher rate of fertility. As intelligence is mostly related to genetics, not to education and other environmental factors, the public will gradually consist of people with lower intelligence, and it will be impossible to prevent crimes and unemployment. As there are differences in intelligence between social classes, different races also have different levels of intelligence. The most intelligent races are Chinese and Japanese. Europeans follow them. and Africans are at the bottom with a significantly low level of intelligence. If the poor are poor, this is because they are less intelligent than the rich. We can pity them, but this will not change anything. As a result, social justice programs are nothing but waste of resources. Moreover, the poor causes the weak genes to be spread as they reproduce more. Therefore, if we stop helping the poor black people, it'll get way better. We can see the scientific point of here, but if you look at this from an ethical perspective, it's safe to say that 1900s American or German eugenics movements are not totally dead. But more ethical scientists are fighting against this really dangerous point of view. One of them is Richard Lewontin, the author of the book Biology as Ideology. He wrote, "Scientists are born as social beings in a productive structure of the family or the state, not as scientists. Their views are shaped by their social experiences. Therefore, science is a social institution, reflecting the views of the public, just like the church before itself. So you can't separate science from the public and the public from the science. Science has no race, nation, or ideology. Knowledge belongs to the people, and the world is illuminated by the light of this knowledge." By the way, this video is the start of a long route. I want to talk about many different areas, such as some modern eugenics potentials, including genetic engineering, human genome project, and CRISPR. So consider this video as an introduction to these areas. In the coming videos, we'll focus more on today and future and approach this topic from many different angles. As always, see you here next week. Bye!